Now Israel had not seen anything like John for hundreds of years. In no one's memory was there anyone like John, except in the stories they had heard about prophets. And now they were seeing one. He preached in the wilderness, the desert, a place where you would die of thirst if you didn't come prepared. The desert was hot, it was dirty, it was dangerous, but the people came in droves to hear John. What made the religious leaders nervous was the fact that the people came in droves to hear John. He preached out there, and they came. So the religious leaders were afraid of John. Now they were skeptical. They were even more afraid. They wanted to know just who he was. If they couldn't really figure out who he was, they wanted to know who he thought he was. John told them who he was not. Not who he was, but who he wasn't. So he said, I am not the Christ. So they said, well, how about Elijah? Are you Elijah? And he said, no, I'm not Elijah. And they said, well then, are you the prophet? And he said, I am not the prophet. Then, after telling them who he was not, he told them who he was. He said, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as Isaiah the prophet said. Then he went on to tell them about the Lord who had already arrived and was among them. He said, among you, stands one whose thong, the sandal thong, I am not worthy to untie. Now I would have thought that these religious leaders would have been eager to know about the great one who was already among them. But you know what? They weren't. And the reason they weren't, in part, was because it was going to change things. Now, how many of you folks really embrace change? Things are going to change, oh boy! I want some of that. No, we don't react that way. Neither did they. Having John preaching in the desert, shaking things up, turning lives upside down, that was bad enough. They didn't even want to know about the great one who was to come, the great one who was already among them. They didn't want to know. So John continued preaching out in the desert. He cried out in the wilderness, in the empty place, in the abandoned place. His preaching brings to mind the old question. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make any sound? I don't know anyone that's ever answered that. Most people go logically, well, of course it makes sound. How do you know? Nobody was there. So, John preached in the wilderness where there was nobody to hear. Think about it. There's nobody there. This just crazy old guy out there preaching away. The question that comes to my mind, is that really preaching? But it was what God called John to do. When John obeyed, first he obeyed, then God sent people to listen. We always want it the other way around. God, you do this and I'll do this. It doesn't work that way. You do this and then God Lord, there's no one here. He preached in the wilderness. He made it clear that he was not the great one, but that the great one was coming, that the great one was already among them. They had not recognized him. The word that is used over and over and over again in this text is the word that is translated witness or testify. It is the Greek word martyria. Martyria. It probably sounds familiar to you, just a little bit, because it is the source of our word martyr. Martyria, martyr. It's not an accident. Witnesses tell the truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. And you know what? Sometimes people kill them for that. God called John to witness, to tell the truth, to the one who was about the one who was coming, to tell the truth, even when the truth hurt, even when the truth was dangerous. It's no accident that the word martyr comes from the Greek word martyria. It means witness, telling the truth. So, God calls us, I'm talking about John now, I'm talking about us, to a ministry. But the ministry is very much like John's. God calls us all, not just preachers, but all of us, to bear witness to Christ. To tell others about Christ. To draw others to Christ. He calls us all, every single one of us, to that ministry. No exceptions. No exception based on race. No exception based on sex. No exception, anyway, based on age. If we do not tell people about Christ, they will not know him. Think about it. Our witness to Christ today plants the seeds of the church tomorrow. But that thought makes us uncomfortable. We don't want that responsibility. You know what it does? It brings to mind buttonholing strangers and asking, do you believe in Jesus? Now, when I was in seminary, I had hair back then. It's long and curly, believe it or not. I got pictures. But I was at the Presbyterian Seminary, which is across kind of the street from Southern Baptist Seminary. And I would go over to Southern Baptist Seminary because they had a gym, and I'd go over and play basketball. So I'm walking along in my cut-off blue jeans and a t-shirt. Y'all have seen me. I haven't changed anything. And sandals. And I'm walking along, and these two guys come up to me and said, have you found Jesus? And I looked at him and said, you Baptists lost him again.